Good morning. How's everybody doing?
Pretty good. How about you?
Anybody have any questions before we get started? All right, well, it's still fresh in everybody's mind from the oral presentations. I want to talk a little bit about MLA format and how it works in a research paper because we're going to start talking about researching. Okay. I know that it seems like it's a lot of picky rules, but there's a reason that there's a universally recognized format for academic papers. Okay? And these are basically formats for showing where research came from, okay, in a paper so that it supports your ideas, so that we can see that you have solid information. Because, as many of you may realize, these days there's a ton of information out there and not all of it is credible. Excuse me. Please. So part of what we discuss is what makes a good source. How do we know if they're legit or if they're full of it? And what qualifies as something that can be used in a research paper to support your ideas, right? I think this is more important than it's ever been given the sort of sophistication of disinformation that's proliferated out there recently, and people profit off of it. So it's become.
The onion, seriously.
I heard somebody talk. You may have to turn up your audio a little.
I said some people take the onion seriously.
Yes, they do. So that's why part of this class is sort of how you judge what's legit so that you build your house upon the rock instead of sand, right? And so that in your own life, you don't get fooled by bad arguments and disinformation that can mislead you, okay? So a research paper really has two purposes for academic writing. And the first one is to send you out to learn something in depth. It gives you a chance to really take the time to read thoroughly about something, explore it, and kind of direct your own research into the areas that you're interested in. Now, I mean, there's usually a subject that you have to adhere to, But I always recommend when you can, choose something that you're really interested in and take the time to do it, because it will be infinitely easier to write about if you're interested in it, as opposed to the unpleasant task of just writing a paper about something that you really don't have that much interest in. So maybe you're in a history class, at least choose a period of history that you're really interested in learning more about. And then that's an advantage to you. I always liked World War II. So that would have been a paper, or an era I would have chosen within and then narrowed it down. Again, do not forget, in that pre-writing stage, narrowing down your subject is still an important part of what we're going to do, even though we're moving from informal types of writing to more formal types of writing. So as I said, number one, we send you out to learn about something in depth, examine sources, judge for yourself what good quality sources are versus bad quality sources. And number two is come back and show us what you learned. In an organized, cogent argument. Okay. Then we can see what you've learned, how you've judged it, what you think of it, and how you put all of that together. So that's why we're talking about how to tell a story, how to describe something. We're also going to soon talk about how to give instructions or describe a process, like photosynthesis or leaves turning color in the fall. Because all of these things might be necessary in your paper. You may have to describe a process in order to describe how someone applies for the Dreamers program to go to college, even though they're not legally in the United States because their parents brought them here as small children. Okay. So you may not need to know how to explain a process. Or maybe you're looking at two policies and you need to know how to compare and contrast. So those are a couple more techniques we're going to start talking about that may be in service of your research paper for things that you have to explain. So really, it's really not just a tool for torturing you, I promise. It is to send you out there and have you learn in depth about something related to your class, and then come back and show us what you've learned and help you learn how to talk about what you know in a clear and convincing manner. So any questions about what a research paper is or what it should and shouldn't do? Excellent question, Lizzie. Okay, they both do the same thing essentially. One is just used for certain classes and disciplines. So like you guys discussed in most of your presentations, MLA is Modern Language Association, and it's used for the humanities, liberal arts most frequently. Basically, it's less emphasizing dates, and that's the main difference. I mean, they're very similar. AP and MLA are actually pretty similar. They have different formatting, so there are different rules for them. But APA emphasizes dates of sources. So you'll see the citations. If you may have already done an APA paper or been assigned one. I also tutor in the Writing Center on APA if you guys have questions about it. We're focusing on MLA because that's typically what you use for English and humanities classes and language classes. Whereas APA focuses more on science and research-based sources, peer-reviewed sources. I mean, you're still going to use those for English as well, but they really want to see the date something is, so you'll frequently see the name of the author with a date right next to it for APA. So they just have a slightly different focus because the timeliness of the research has more impact for disciplines that use APA, like science classes, psychology, things that have ongoing research in journals and publications about how the mind works, or scientific studies, or nursing. I work with a lot of nursing students who use APA. So they just have slightly different formatting and a little bit different emphasis on what information they want. They want to be able to see right there, how old is that source you're using? Whereas MLA isn't as focused on that. I think MLA is the simpler of the two, but that's the difference. That's a good question. So you always want to check and see which one the class is requiring so you don't end up using the wrong format. There are some other styles too that are less frequently required, but some teachers like Chicago style and a few others, but those, the two primary ones that we use are APA and MLA. Good question. Anybody else? Is anybody using APA for our other classes? Nobody yet? Really, if you get a good idea, it's basically the same thing. They're showing, use it for psych, yeah. You're showing where your information came from so that we can verify your sources or get more information. Maybe you only mentioned a few ideas from that source and we're like, oh, that looks like an interesting source. Or maybe it has some information that I want to research. And I can go back and find your sources. So anytime you take something from the source, whether you put it in your own words or whether you use their words, okay, you're going to cite it in the text of your paper using one of these formats. And for this class, you're going to use MLA. So let's look at a paper and how those two elements work together. The citations in your text and the Works Cited page that you can refer to. It's hard because you have to think of it as something that's there, like punctuation, it's there for the reader and not necessarily for the writer. Okay, so let's look at a sample paper. So this is on the Purdue OWL website. And you can see the stuff that you guys have already become familiar with through just formatting the first page for the last paper that we did. How to format this, put your last name and page number. And this has all kinds of useful notes on it here if you forget some of the rules that we've covered. Then you have the title, and then you start your text. Okay. So then you're going through and discussing your argument. In this case, let's look for a citation. Let's see where they've used some information. So here, right here is an example of the parenthetical in-text citation. Okay, they did not mention the author's name. So if we go back up here, one of the improvements was the development of canals and steamboats, which allowed farmers to sell what has previously been unsellable, resulted in a substantial increase in a farmer's ability to earn income. They took that from a source. So then they have to say, okay, here is the source. And I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. It's about steamboats. Steamboats are cool. We're in Illinois and Missouri. We're next to the river, right? So there was a lot of steamboat activity. So let's say I want to find more information about that source. I take this and then I go to the last page, which is the Works Cited page. Okay, on a separate page, always. Still has your last name and page number for pagination. And the way that it's formatted, see how the first line sticks out? I can very easy alphabetically look up Danoff, right? There it is, right there. Okay, so if I want to go find this source, I can look for the author, and I can look, maybe he's written several books. I want this book, Change in Agriculture, the Northern United States. Okay, published in 1969. Okay, so what the basic thing you have to check for is, whatever you cite in your paper has to have this information. Whatever this information is first, if it doesn't have it, we can't find it. Here's an example without an author, right? Historical census browser. If you don't have the author's name, you start with the title and you alphabetize by the first significant word in the title. You don't use the or a. Oh, went away. Okay, looks like my internet is not happy today. You guys are still there, right? Hello? Have I lost you?
Yes, we are still here.
I don't know why it cut out all of a sudden. But you see, if you do your in-text citations correctly, your reader's screwed. Because if we look at a citation and it doesn't have that information, that's either the author's last name or the short version of the title, we have to read your entire Works Cited to find out whatever minuscule piece of information you use from that source. Nobody wants to do that, right? We want to be able to look it up quickly, find it, and go on with our lives. Okay? So MLA is fairly simple. If you've got the author's name, you're golden. Okay? Because you're always going to use that citation. And it's just the author's name and the page number, if you have one. As you know, if it's an electronic source, it may not have a page number, right? Okay. There's no comma between it. You may find some older examples of MLA where they did used to use a comma between the author's name and the page number. They do not do that anymore. So it's just simple. If you had no page number, it would simply look like this. There you go, just the author's name. Okay. Now, if you name the author in your writing, like you guys were doing, you guys had some really great examples of the signal phrases. According to George Anhoff, you know, open quotes, blah, 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 close quotes. Then at the end, if there was a page number, you would need to put it. Okay. If there was no page number, you would not put anything in parentheses at the end of that sentence. Okay. A lot of online sources do not have what we call stable page numbers, because I can print off on my computer and I might print off 2 pages and your printer might print off 3 pages, right? So if I say it's on page 3 and somebody else only prints off 2 pages, they're very confused. So you want something, whenever you can, choose the PDF version of a source. So when we start doing research and orientate for the library, it'll give you some choices about how to choose to download a source. PDFs have stable page numbers, so you can always easily refer to the page number. But that's the main thing I wanted to show you guys. Do you see how that works? You have basically whatever it is that you've taken information from in the text, acknowledged. Yeah, here's the source I got it from. And anybody who wants to check it or get more information from it goes to your last page and alphabetically looks it up. Let me see if I can get it back so I can talk a little bit more about the Works Cited. There it is. One moment, let me share my screen. So you can see it's all double spaced. There's no extra space between this first entry and the second source. Okay. The indenting is what shows when there's a new source starting. And it basically just makes this stick out, and it's in alphabetical order, as many of you mentioned, so that it's easy to look it up. And the easiest way to do this is, let's say you type all this out and it's still flush with the margin. You highlight everything and hit Control-T, and it should create this hanging indent where the first line is still flush and everything under it is lined up as it should be. Okay, now that works in Word. I don't know how it works in Google Docs or some of the others. So you can see there's no extra spaces. It's all double spaced. Anything that doesn't have an author is listed by the title, and you would alphabetize by the first big word. But that's how it works. It basically is, here's in my text what I found, where I found it, and here's where you can go and find it if you want more information or verifying what I said. Okay. Questions about that and the purpose of academic citation and reference formatting? One quick and easy way to check your in-text citations is to look at it and say, okay, now if I go to my Works Cited, can I find it quickly alphabetically? If you can't, then your in-text citation is probably incorrect. Now, there are, of course, exceptions to this. You might have multiple authors. All of that stuff you can look up. The main thing about the little details is you have to know where to go to find that information, because that information does change. APA just came out with a huge update in the spring that we're all still adjusting to. And MLA updated 2 years ago. So the basic format doesn't change, the author page number format or mention the author in your writing format. But little tiny details like how you write volume number or something like that might be adjusted. But it's all about showing where your information came from so that we know that you did good research and that we can find more information if we want to and add to our own knowledge through what you have researched. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is starting to consider your controversial topic. So what is a controversy? Talked a little bit about it last week. What is a controversy? You had to define it. Everybody type your definition in the chat. Argumentative topic, yes. Something people debate on, yes. And really, that's one of the key parts. It has to be something legitimately that people disagree on, that has reasonable opinions on both sides, okay? If there's nobody reasonable on the other side arguing against you, like it would be really easy to knock down your opposition because they're, you know, if they're arguing we should abuse children to keep them in line and beat them until they submit, you know, this is not it should hopefully not be a widely accepted argument, right? With reasonable arguments. It is something non-controversial because pretty much society agrees on it. Ooh, Lizzie, you're very optimistic. Civilly? Yes. kind of abandoned civility in a lot of ways lately, but it should be, yes, it should be something that people can argue civilly about. Okay? It just means you've got points on both sides. And so when you guys do the next paper, basically the next two papers are going to build upon each other. I'll talk more about what's required tomorrow in class. Yeah, something people reasonably disagree about. You have to first figure out what the two sides think and what are some of the major reasons they believe what they believe. So what are some controversies? What are some issues that people argue about in our society? That's what we talked about last time. Yeah. So corporal punishment, which is spanking, is spanking or physical punishment a legitimate form of discipline? Yeah, the presidential election. Yeah, I think last time we talked about online education, right? Benefits, drawbacks, and there are reasonable opinions on both sides. Presidential election, vaccinations. Yeah, the autism one is tricky. I mean, it's worth arguing because so many people are against vaccinations. Unfortunately, they don't have a lot of evidence to support them, so it can be tricky. That's another element to look at. Glad you brought that up, Liberty. Which is there enough research? That's the second litmus test. Is there enough research on your topic to prove what you want to say? So when you start looking for topics, you don't have to do what we call the top 50. And these are the arguments sort of that get done over and over again. You can do a new aspect of the top 50. So top 50 tends to refer to arguments that are controversies that are always with us. So what do you think are some things that were controversial in the 50s that are still controversial today, that people still argue about and have legitimate opinions, and we haven't, we've made some laws, people disagree about them. Women's rights, right? Yes. Equal rights. Should there be protections? And should there be quotas for hiring a certain amount of men and women? Are women entitled to childcare for, their children, because that burden tends to fall on women more heavily than men in our society, although that's been changing. Gender and race, yes, race definitely has been with us since the beginning of our nation. A couple more, and then I'll show you how you can take and use a new aspect of it. Any others come to mind? There's always presidential elections, you're correct. About gun control. Abortion. In schools, basically the separation of church and state. We can drill down and get more specific about some of these issues because there's lots of aspects to these issues. If there is a book on a topic, don't choose that topic for the research paper because you don't have enough time to cover it. What you have to do is narrow down one part of that topic to talk about. Okay? So let's take a new aspect. Oh, immigration. That's one that's always. We are a nation of immigrants, right? Most of us are not Native American in heritage. Therefore, the majority of us came from other places. Our ancestors did. So how do you take a topic and make it new again and not just do the same beaten to death arguments? You look at what's going on right now in terms of law. So if we take race, of course, you know, there's argument right now about is the United States, is there racial discrimination in the United States? Never thought they'd be arguing about whether this is true or not, but they are. What do you guys think?
I've seen people deny it on social media. It's insane.
Recently, I don't know if you guys watched the debates, but the vice president said he does not believe that there's racial discrimination in policing. It's kind of tough to solve a problem if you don't acknowledge it's actually there. So that would be a new aspect of it, which would be, you know, we take one piece of it, right? So that would be police and race. And then you can decide what aspect of that do you want to talk about. How people are pulled over and stopped. They've done studies in some communities that show, even though some minorities are a certain percentage of the population, they're stopped disproportionately, right? Yeah, they say Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. Yeah. So that's how you make one of the sort of old topics new again. You look at what's going on right now. So there's that, is it defunding the police or reforming the police? I think they're still figuring out what they mean. Does it need to happen? How deeply does it need to happen? Do we just need to throw money at the problem? Do we just need to get some more mental health workers? There are lots of sort of good, you know, opinions that can be discussed on both sides of that issue. So that's a new topic of racial discrimination that we can discuss. They've rolled back the Voting Rights Act to some extent, so you're seeing a lot more voter suppression. Anybody seen the lines of people waiting? Yesterday was Georgia. Texas is starting early voting today. And I just saw a picture. I was looking at my phone at about 7 a.m. There's already like an hour line at one of the polling places that hasn't opened yet in Texas. The governor of Texas closed a lot of drop boxes for election security. You know, legitimate opinions on both sides, you know. So basically, if you want to do one of those topics, just make sure you're doing something that's new and relevant to talk about, right? So I got my access and my password worked out. So let's look at that database. I want you guys to take a look at and start thinking about. So let me show you how to access it. So you guys recognize McKendree's main page, right? If you go over here to academics, this is one way that you can access the library. You go to academic resources, and right down here is Holman Library. Okay. The other way is you can go to the apps, and there's an app specifically for Holman Library right there. You can click on either one of those. Right now it looks like they're doing the main search. They're working on it. But you guys are going to use the databases a lot. So here is a lot. These are the resources to find things. Like if your course has reserved a book that you're supposed to look at, you find it here. We're going to deal with just the databases today. And the one I want you guys to take a look at is called Opposing Viewpoints in Context. So you'll get the alphabetical, list here. You hit the O's, and then you go to Opposing Viewpoints in Context. You click on it, it'll make you log in. So here's the main page. So you can either search if you have something in mind, or if you're not sure yet what you want to talk about, it has this Browse Issues category. So you can see it divides things up into things: business and economics, energy and environmentalism, health and medicine, science, technology, ethics, national debate topics, law and politics, society and culture. So there's Black Lives Matter, internet activism, owning exotic animals. So these are all controversies. Anybody see anything they're interested in?
Vaccines.
What was it?
Vaccines.
Vaccines. So let's go to health and medicine. Oh, wait, I saw it there. It was under a different category. And yeah, it looks like they've updated the information, right? So they'll give you a little definition. You can read more. You guys are starting to get an overview to see if you're going to be interested enough. Later on, you can dig down into these sources, and then one good place to start is viewpoints. So what viewpoints are essays that talk about both sides. So if we click on it, we should get some writings that express opinions on both sides of the issue. Anti-vaxxers should have the right to choose not to vaccinate. The anti-vaccine movement endangers the disabled. School vaccination exemptions should be restricted. So this one kind of opposes this one, right? Educating anti-vaxxers doesn't work. The anti-vaccination movement is given a false equivalence by the media. Basically, they're given credibility they shouldn't have. Okay. This is about, should you exempt people who have moral obligations or religious obligations, or generally, people should not be allowed to refuse vaccinations. So this gives you sort of an overview of the topic, which you're going to need for the next paper, because you're basically going to say, okay, my paper's about vaccinations and whether or not they should be required for schools. So you can look at the essays and say, what are the arguments on one side and what are the arguments on the other? And you're basically going to explain the arguments on both sides of the topic. And then later on, here's more sources you can look at: the news and magazines, statistics, videos, audio, websites, and other references. Okay. Right now, I want you guys to start looking over the main page and start looking at issues and start narrowing down what you might want to talk about. Browse the issues, start reading about one you're interested in. Because you're going to need one topic and a backup topic in case the one that you have does not work. I always recommend people have a backup one so they don't panic if they suddenly decide they really don't like the one they chose first. All right. Okay, Alexa. So we're about out of time. Some of you guys need to catch up on Khan Academy exercises, but if you have already got those done, then start looking at opposing viewpoints and reading and thinking about what topics you might consider doing for your next two papers. Because the first paper will be, here are both sides, and the last paper will be, here's the side I choose and here's what I think. I will come back and start a new meeting in case anybody has any questions. Otherwise, go ahead and start looking for topics. Okay? I'll open a new meeting here in a second. All right.